They forced him to marry her as the ultimate humiliation. An Apache warrior cast out by his own people, shackled to a blind Spanish woman who couldn't even see the shame in his eyes. The tribal council called it justice. The settlers called it mercy. But everyone knew the truth. It was a punishment worse than death. What no one expected was that in the darkness of her world, he would finally find the light he'd been searching for. September 1876. The Arizona Territory stretched vast and unforgiving under a copper sun. The settlement of Dos Cruces sat wedged between Apache land and Mexican territory, a place where three worlds collided and nobody felt at home. Dust devils danced through the single dirt road that split the town in half. Adobe buildings baked in the heat, their walls cracked and bleeding red clay. The cantina stood at one end, the mission church at the other, and between them lay every kind of sin and salvation a man could want. Geronimo sat alone in the shade behind the blacksmith's forge, stripped to the waist, his bronze skin slick with sweat and soot. His long black hair hung loose past his shoulders, tangled with dust and ash. He worked the bellows with mechanical precision, pumping air into flames that turned iron white-hot. The blacksmith, a barrel-chested German named Klaus, paid him in scraps, leftover bread, sometimes a few coins that wouldn't buy a decent meal. It was work nobody else wanted, standing in hell's mouth for 12 hours under the desert sun. They called him many things in Dos Cruces. Half-breed, though both his parents were full-blooded Apache. Traitor, though he'd never betrayed anyone except himself. Coward, though he'd killed 3 men in combat before his 20th summer. The names didn't matter anymore. He'd stopped listening to them the same way he'd stopped listening to the voice in his head that said he deserved better. His crime was simple. He'd refused to fight. 2 years ago, when the tribal council called for a raid against a settler wagon train, Geronimo had stood before the elders and said no. Not because he loved the white men. They'd taken everything from his people. Not because he feared death. He'd walked beside it since childhood. He refused because the wagon train carried families, women and children running from war back east, people who'd done nothing except be born the wrong color in the wrong place. He'd seen the faces of Apache children killed by white soldiers. He couldn't become the same monster wearing different skin. The council called it weakness. His own father, a warrior who'd counted coup against cavalry soldiers, spat at his feet and declared him dead. His mother wept but said nothing. The tribe cast him out at dawn, stripped him of his weapons, his horse, his name. They gave him one chance to redeem himself, bring back 10 cavalry scalps, prove his loyalty and blood. He walked away instead, chose exile over murder, chose to be nothing rather than become what they demanded. That was 2 years ago. Since then, he drifted through settlements like a ghost, taking work nobody else would touch, sleeping in barns or under stars, moving on when people's tolerance wore thin. Dos Cruces was the 5th town in as many months. He figured he had maybe another week before Klaus found a reason to let him go. That's how it always went. People needed him until they didn't. Then they remembered he was Apache, remembered the raids and the blood, and suddenly his hands looked too dangerous to keep around. The sun climbed higher. Geronimo plunged a horseshoe into the water barrel. Steam hissed and rose in clouds. He pulled it out, examined the curve, found it acceptable. Klaus would sell it for $2 and pay him 20 cents. That was the arrangement. That was always the arrangement. Hoofbeats broke the afternoon quiet. Geronimo looked up to see 5 riders coming down the main road, Mexican vaqueros from the Ortega Ranch 10 miles south. He recognized them, hard men who worked cattle and settled disputes with rope and rifle. They rode with purpose, not the lazy pace of men running errands. The leader was called Mateo, a bull of a man with a scar that split his left eyebrow. He'd been in the cantina last week when Geronimo came in for water. He'd made comments in Spanish, assuming the Apache couldn't understand. Geronimo understood perfectly. He'd said nothing, drunk his water, left. The vaqueros dismounted outside the cantina. Mateo glanced toward the forge, caught Geronimo's eye, smiled without warmth. They went inside. Geronimo returned to his work. Whatever business they had, it didn't concern him. Nothing in this town concerned him. He was a shadow passing through, forgotten before he even left. An hour later, Father Domenico appeared, his black cassock dusty from the road, sweat staining circles under his arms. The priest was old, maybe 60, with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering and a voice that still believed in redemption. He'd been decent to Geronimo, never preached at him, sometimes left food wrapped in cloth outside the forge. They'd spoken twice, brief conversations about weather and work, nothing deeper. Geronimo didn't trust kindness. Experience taught him it always came with conditions. The priest approached slowly, hands clasped in front of him. "Geronimo, may I speak with you?" His English carried an Italian accent, soft consonants and musical vowels. Geronimo set down his hammer, wiped his hands on a rag, nodded. The priest gestured toward the shade of a cottonwood tree 20 feet away. They walked in silence. Grasshoppers sang in the dry grass. A hawk circled overhead, hunting. Father Domenico took a breath, choosing words carefully. "There is a situation. A young woman, Gabriela Ortega, daughter of Don Rodrigo Ortega, who owns the largest ranch in the territory. She is blind, has been since childhood. Fever took her sight 10 years ago. She is 23 now, unmarried, considered a burden by her family." The priest paused, studying Geronimo's face for reaction. He gave none. The priest continued. "Her father made arrangements with a man from Santa Fe, a merchant looking to expand his holdings through marriage. The wedding was planned for next month. Geronimo waited. There was more. There was always more. 3 days ago, Gabriela refused, said she would rather die than marry a man who wanted her father's land, not her. Don Rodrigo is a proud man, a man who does not tolerate defiance, especially from a daughter he considers damaged goods. He consulted with the vaqueros, with the town magistrate, with me. They decided on a punishment that would teach her obedience and rid the family of embarrassment." The priest's voice dropped. "They decided to marry her to you, an outcast Apache with nothing, no name, no property, no future. The magistrate agreed to perform the ceremony. It is legal under territorial law if both parties consent, or in cases of guardianship transfer. Don Rodrigo claims guardianship. He says if Gabriela refuses the merchant, then she accepts whatever husband he chooses. She has no say. The law supports him." Geronimo felt ice spread through his chest despite the heat. "Why tell me?" The priest met his eyes. "Because you also have no say. The magistrate will declare it valid, whether you agree or not. Refusal means jail, maybe worse. Don Rodrigo's vaqueros are not gentle men. They will ensure compliance." The priest's hands trembled slightly. "I'm ashamed to be part of this. I argued against it. I was outvoted. The church here is weak. The law is whatever powerful men decide it is, so I'm to be shackled to a blind woman I've never met as punishment for her disobedience and mine." Geronimo's voice was flat, empty. The priest nodded. "The ceremony is tomorrow at dawn. You will live in a shack on the edge of the Ortega property, far from the main house. You will be given minimal supplies. They expect you both to fail, to starve or kill each other or simply disappear. That is the point, to break you both." Geronimo looked toward the mountains in the distance, the sacred peaks where his people still lived free, where he could never return. He thought about running, about disappearing into the desert tonight, letting them chase shadows. But where would he go? Every settlement was the same. Every town had men like Don Rodrigo, systems designed to crush anyone who didn't fit. Running meant starting over again. Another forge, another corner, another slow death by 1,000 small humiliations. If I agree, if I go through with this, what happens to her? Father Domenico's face softened. "That depends on you." She is terrified. She has been locked in her room since she refused the merchant. Her father has not spoken to her. Her brothers mock her. The servants avoid her. She believes she's being sent to her death. The priest stepped closer. "I have known Gabriela since she was a child. She is kind, intelligent, stronger than anyone gives her credit for. But she has been treated like a broken doll her entire life, hidden away, told she is worthless. This will destroy her unless someone shows her differently. You want me to save her?" Geronimo almost laughed. I can't even save myself. I'm not asking you to save anyone." The priest's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm asking you to see her. Not as punishment, not as burden. As a person. That's all. Just see her." Geronimo was silent for a long moment. The sun beat down. Sweat ran down his spine. Somewhere in town a dog barked. A child laughed. Life continued, indifferent to suffering, indifferent to justice. He thought about his mother's face, the day they exiled him, how she'd looked away when he tried to meet her eyes. He thought about sleeping in barns, eating scraps, being nothing to everyone. He thought about the wagon train families he'd refused to kill, how they never knew he'd saved them, how it didn't matter because heroism without witness was just another kind of invisibility. "Tell me about her." The words surprised him as much as the priest. Father Domenico smiled, sad but genuine. "She loves stories. Before she lost her sight, her mother read to her every night, fairy tales and adventures. After the fever, she memorized them all, can recite entire books from memory. She hears everything, notices sounds most people miss, birdsong, wind patterns, the way different people walk. She plays guitar, taught herself by touch and sound. Her father forbade it, said music was unsuitable for a lady of her station, so she plays at night when everyone sleeps." The priest's eyes grew distant. "She is lonely, Geronimo, desperately lonely." Surrounded by family but utterly alone, Geronimo understood loneliness. It was the only thing he'd never been without. "Tomorrow at dawn." The priest nodded. "I will come for you before sunrise. There will be no celebration, no guests. Just the magistrate, the vaqueros to ensure compliance, and me to bless what cannot be blessed." He placed a hand on Geronimo's shoulder. "I am sorry. For what it's worth, I am sorry." The priest walked away, his shadow long in the afternoon sun. Geronimo stood under the cottonwood tree, feeling the weight of tomorrow settle on him like chains. He'd been cast out for refusing to kill innocents. Now he was being forced into marriage as punishment for that mercy. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so perfectly cruel. Klaus appeared in the doorway of the forge, wiping his massive hands on a leather apron. "You heard then." His German accent was thick, vowels heavy. Geronimo nodded. Klaus spat into the dirt. "Don Rodrigo is a bastard. Thinks he owns everything, the land, the cattle, the people. His daughter, she's good girl. I see her once in town, before the sickness took her eyes. She smiled at everyone, even the Apache children. Her father beat her for it." Klaus's face hardened. "You could run. I give you a horse, some food. Be in Mexico by morning, and leave her to whatever they'd do next." Geronimo shook his head. "No, I've run enough." Klaus studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You are braver than they say." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small pouch, pressed it into Geronimo's palm. $40. All I got saved. Take it. You will need it. I can't. You can. Klaus closed Geronimo's fingers around the pouch. "My daughter, she died young. Fever, like the Ortega girl. I could not save her. Maybe you save this one, maybe you don't. But you try. That is more than most men do." He turned, walked back into the forge. The conversation was over. Geronimo opened the pouch, saw the coins inside, more money than he'd held in 2 years. He felt something crack in his chest, some wall he'd built to keep everything out. Klaus didn't owe him anything. Nobody in this town owed him anything. Yet here was kindness, raw and unexpected, from a man who'd also lost someone, who understood that trying mattered even when success wasn't promised. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat on the roof of the forge, watching stars wheel overhead, ancient and indifferent. He thought about his sister, younger by 3 years, who'd caught pneumonia the winter he turned 16. He'd held her while she burned with fever, had sung the old songs their mother taught them, had promised her she'd be fine. She died anyway. He'd learned then that promises meant nothing against the world's cruelty. He'd stopped making them after that. But tomorrow he'd make vows. To a woman he'd never met. In front of men who wanted them both to fail. The words would mean nothing legally. They were already meaningless personally. Yet something in him resisted the cynicism. Father Domenico said Gabriella loved stories. Geronimo had loved them too once, before life beat the wonder out of him. His grandmother used to tell tales of Coyote, the trickster, of how the world was made, of warriors who became stars. He'd believed in magic then, believed in meaning. Somewhere in a ranch house 10 miles south, a blind woman named Gabriela Ortega stared into her own darkness, waiting for dawn to deliver her to a fate she couldn't see coming. Did she believe in anything anymore? Had her blindness taken more than sight? Had loneliness carved out everything soft inside her until only survival remained? Or did some part of her still hope, still dream, still imagine that maybe, against all odds, tomorrow might bring something other than more pain? The desert wind blew cold. Coyotes sang their lonely songs. Geronimo closed his eyes and made a decision. Not a promise he'd learned those were worthless. A decision. He would not make Gabriela's life worse. Whatever happened after tomorrow, however they were forced to live, he would not add to her suffering. He would not be another person who treated her like a burden. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't love. It was simply the only choice that let him look at himself without complete disgust. Morning came too fast and too slow, the way important days always did. Geronimo washed in the water barrel, cold enough to shock. He had one clean shirt, traded from a drifter months ago. It was too big, the sleeves too long, but it was whole. He'd saved it for something important. This qualified. He tied his hair back with a strip of leather, looked at his reflection in the still water. A stranger stared back, thin from hunger, scarred from fights, eyes that had stopped expecting anything good. He was 24 and looked 40. The desert aged you fast. Being unwanted aged you faster. Father Domenico arrived as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky blood red. The priest looked tired, like he hadn't slept either. He carried a bundle wrapped in cloth. For you. Inside was a vest, simple brown leather with no decoration, and a pair of boots, worn but serviceable. Gabriela made the vest years ago before she lost her sight. She wanted you to have something she touched. The boots were mine when I was younger, and thought I might need to run from God. He smiled without humor. They didn't help. You cannot outrun what lives inside you. Geronimo put them on. The vest fit perfectly, the leather soft from years of storage. The boots were tight but would stretch. He felt different wearing them, less like a ghost, more like a man. It was an illusion, but he'd take it. They walked to the church in silence. The town was still sleeping, the only sound their footsteps on packed earth and the morning doves calling to the dawn. The magistrate waited inside, a skeletal man named Thorn, who served whoever paid his fee. Don Rodrigo's vaqueros lined the back pews, 5 of them, hands resting on gun belts. The message was clear. This was happening whether anyone objected or not. Father Domenico took his place at the altar. Geronimo stood before him, feeling the weight of eyes on his back, the weight of the future pressing down. The church door opened. Sunlight spilled in. Gabriela Ortega entered between her 2 brothers, their grips firm on her arms. Geronimo's breath caught. She wore white, a simple dress that her mother must have made years ago, yellowed with age but clean. Her dark hair fell loose past her shoulders, no veil, no flowers. Her brothers had dressed her like this to mock her, to emphasize the contrast between what a bride should be and what she was. Her eyes were open but unfocused, dark brown and beautiful and seeing nothing. Her face was pale, jaw set with determination or terror. Maybe both. Her brothers walked her down the aisle like she was cargo, dumped her next to Geronimo, stepped back. She swayed, caught herself, stood rigid. Her hands trembled at her sides. Geronimo could see her breathing, quick and shallow, the panic barely controlled. She was terrified. Of him, of the unknown, of everything this moment represented. The magistrate began the ceremony, words stripped of all warmth or meaning. A legal transaction read with the enthusiasm of a man reading a shopping list. Do you, Geronimo, Apache outcast, take this woman? Do you, Gabriela Ortega, take this man? Neither was given a chance to object. The magistrate declared them bound by territorial law. Father Domenico stepped forward, placed his hands over theirs without joining them. May God have mercy on you both, he whispered. That is all I can offer. It was done. Geronimo was married. To a woman who hadn't looked at him, couldn't look at him, who stood beside him like a prisoner waiting for execution. The vaqueros left. The brothers left. The magistrate left. Father Domenico remained, and in the empty church with sunlight streaming through stained glass, Geronimo finally spoke. "I'm Geronimo." His voice sounded strange in the silence. "I don't know what they told you about me, but I won't hurt you. That's all I can promise. Nothing else, just that." Gabriella turned her head toward his voice. Her eyes passed over him, through him, finding nothing. Her voice when she spoke was steady despite the fear. "They told me you're a savage, that you'll probably kill me in my sleep, that this is what I deserve for defying my father." She paused. "Are you going to kill me?" "No. Then you're already better than my family." She smiled, bitter and broken. "Can we leave now?"
"I can't breathe in here."
He offered his arm, remembered she couldn't see it, said, "I'm to your right." She reached out, found his sleeve, gripped it. Her hand was small, strong, shaking. They walked out together into the morning sun, and somewhere behind them, Father Domenico knelt in prayer for two people the world had decided to throw away. The wagon rattled over desert roads, every rut and stone sending tremors through the wooden bed. Matteo drove, his broad back to them, whistling a tune that mocked the silence. Geronimo sat beside Gabriella in the back, their shoulders nearly touching, but careful not to. She'd said nothing since leaving the church, her hands folded in her lap, her face turned toward sounds he couldn't identify, birds he didn't recognize, wind through brush he couldn't name. She was reading the world through ears and skin, while he could only watch. The shack appeared after an hour, a structure barely worthy of the name. Walls of weathered adobe, a roof of mismatched boards and canvas, one window with no glass, just shutters hanging crooked. It sat alone in a shallow valley, surrounded by nothing but scrub brush and stones, far enough from the main ranch that screams wouldn't carry. Matteo pulled the wagon to a stop, jumped down, threw 2 canvas sacks into the dirt. "Supplies," he said in Spanish. "Enough for a week if you're careful. After that, you figure it out or you starve." "Don Rodrigo doesn't care which." Geronimo climbed down, turned to help Gabriella. She'd already moved to the edge of the wagon bed, her legs dangling, feeling for ground she couldn't see. He reached up, hands hovering near her waist. "May I?" She flinched at his voice, nodded once. He lifted her down, light as a bird, set her on her feet. She immediately let go, stood swaying, disoriented. Matteo laughed. "Good luck, Apache. You'll need it." He cracked the reins, drove off, left them in a cloud of dust that settled slowly in the still air. Gabriella stood frozen, her hands out slightly, palms down, sensing space. "Where are we?" Geronimo looked around. Middle of nowhere. One-room shack, no neighbors, nothing for miles. He picked up the supply sacks, heavy with flour, beans, lard, a little coffee. "There's a well, looks like it still works. Some firewood stacked against the wall. It's not much, I didn't expect much." Her voice was flat, exhausted. "Can you describe it?" "Not colors, I don't remember those anymore. Shapes, distances, where things are." He set down the sacks, looked at the space, trying to see it through her darkness. The shack is maybe 12 feet square. Door faces east, window on the south wall. There's a stove in the northwest corner, rusty but functional. A table with 2 chairs, both wobbling. A bed frame with rope webbing, no mattress. Dirt floor, packed hard. The well is 20 paces north of the door. I can count them out for you later. She listened with complete focus, her head tilted, building a map in her mind. "Is there a roof, mostly? Might leak when it rains." She almost smiled. "Then we'll get wet together." He studied her face, the way she held herself, spine straight despite everything, chin up even though she couldn't meet anyone's eyes. She was terrified but fighting not to show it. He recognized the strategy. He'd used it for 2 years. "I'll bring the supplies inside, get the stove working. You can sit or explore or whatever you need." She shook her head. "Show me around first, all of it. Every corner, every object, every distance. I need to know where I am. If I'm going to live here, I need to see it my way." He nodded, realized she couldn't see it, said, "All right." He took her hand. Her fingers cold despite the heat, led her to the door. "Step up 6 inches." She lifted her foot, found the threshold, crossed it. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and abandonment. He walked her along the walls, let her touch everything, the rough adobe, the gaps where wind came through, the window frame with its broken shutter. This is the stove iron, 3 feet tall, door opens toward you. She ran her hands over it, learning its shape, finding the handle, the vents, the flat top for cooking. He showed her the table. Let her feel the uneven legs, the scarred surface, the chairs, one missing a back rung, the bed frame, empty except for the rope webbing sagging in the middle. She touched everything methodically, her fingers reading what her eyes couldn't, building a mental map. When they finished, she stood in the center of the room, eyes closed, turning slowly. 23 steps from door to back wall, 15 side to side. Stove in the corner, I can navigate by heat when it's burning. Table between door and bed. Window to my right when I face the door. Her eyes opened, unseeing but certain. I know where I am now. Geronimo felt something shift in his chest. Respect maybe, or recognition. She wasn't helpless. She was adapting, surviving, doing what she needed to do. He brought in the supplies, found a broom made of bound grass, swept the worst of the dust out, while she sat at the table, listening to him work. The sound of the broom was rhythmic, almost meditative. She spoke without turning her head toward him. "Why did they cast you out?" He stopped sweeping. That was fast. She shrugged. "We're married now, supposedly. We're going to be living in one room. I'd rather know who I'm trapped with." "Fair enough." He leaned on the broom, chose his words. 2 years ago, my tribe wanted to raid a settler wagon train. Families, mostly. Women and children. I refused to go. Said I wouldn't kill people who hadn't done anything to us. The council called it cowardice. My father called me dead. They gave me a chance to redeem myself, bring back cavalry scalps, prove my loyalty. I walked away instead. So you chose exile over murder, yes. She turned her face toward him, her expression unreadable. That took courage. He laughed, bitter. Didn't feel like courage. Felt like failure. Still does. Most people think I'm a coward. Maybe they're right. She shook her head. Cowards do what's easy. You did what was hard. There's a difference. He had no answer for that, went back to sweeping. After a moment, she spoke again. I'm blind because of scarlet fever when I was 13. I remember colors, faces, what the world looked like. Sometimes I dream in images, wake up thinking I can see again, then reality comes back. Her hands gripped the table edge. My father was ashamed. Locked me away, told people I was delicate, needed protection. What he meant was I was broken, unsellable, an embarrassment. My mother tried, but she died 3 years ago. After that, it got worse. My brothers treated me like furniture. The servants pitied me. I was invisible and too visible at the same time. The merchant from Santa Fe. Geronimo set the broom aside, started organizing supplies. Why'd you refuse him? She laughed, sharp and humorless. Because I heard him talking to my father, negotiating like I was livestock. He wanted the land, the water rights, the cattle. I was just paperwork. He never even spoke to me, not once. Just looked past me like I wasn't there. She turned her face toward the window, toward light she couldn't see. I thought if I said no, maybe my father would see me. Really see me, realize I was still his daughter, still a person. Instead, he did this. Geronimo pulled out a dented pot, filled it from his canteen, set it on the stove. I'm sorry, for what? You didn't do this. No, but I'm part of it now. We both are. He struck a match, lit kindling he'd shaved from the firewood. The flames caught, grew, began to warm the cold iron. I meant what I said at the church. I won't hurt you. You're safe from me, whatever that's worth. She was quiet for a long time, her face turned toward the growing warmth of the stove. Finally she spoke, her voice softer. Why? You could make this worse for me. Some men would. Take out their anger, their humiliation on someone weaker. Why promise not to? He watched the flames, the way they moved, hungry and alive. Because I know what it's like to be thrown away, to be told you're worthless by people who should protect you. I won't do that to someone else. I can't. It would make me exactly what they say I am. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She reached out, her hands searching air, finding his arm, gripping it. Thank you. He covered her hand with his, brief, then let go. "Don't thank me yet. We still have to figure out how to survive out here." She smiled, small but real. "Then we better get started." The first week was hard in ways neither expected. The supplies stretched thin. Geronimo rationed everything, made beans last 3 days, used flour sparingly, boiled coffee grounds twice to extract every bit of flavor. He hunted with a bow he made from juniper wood, killed 2 rabbits, a quail, brought them back to the shack, where Gabriella waited, listening for his footsteps. She learned to clean game by touch, her hands steady even when the work was bloody. He was surprised, said so. She laughed. "My brothers used to hunt. I watched before I lost my sight, memorized the process. Turns out memory works when you need it to." They established routines. He woke before dawn, checked the well, gathered firewood, hunted if they needed meat. She organized the shack by touch, found places for everything, insisted on order so she could navigate. She cooked, learning the stove's temperament, how hot it burned, where flames concentrated. The first few meals were disasters. Burned beans, bread that wouldn't rise, coffee so bitter it was undrinkable. She didn't complain, just tried again, adjusted, improved. By the 5th day, she made cornbread that was almost good. They talked while working, small exchanges that built slowly into something more. He told her about his grandmother's stories, about Coyote and Raven, about how the stars came to be. She told him about books she'd memorized, fairy tales and adventures, reciting passages in a voice that brought characters to life. He'd never heard anyone read aloud before, didn't know words could sound like music. She made Don Quixote come alive in the firelight, made him laugh at the foolish knight tilting at windmills, made him understand that maybe foolishness and bravery weren't so different. Nights were awkward. 1 room, 1 bed. He insisted she take it, slept on the floor near the door. She argued the first night, said it wasn't fair, he'd worked all day, needed rest. He refused. She finally accepted, but he could hear her guilt in the darkness, the way she shifted on the ropes, restless and uncomfortable. By the 3rd night, she spoke into the black. "This is stupid. The bed's big enough for 2. We can share it without anything. We're both adults. We're married, technically. It's practical." He was silent so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. "Then are you sure?" "Yes, I trust you. I don't know why, but I do." He rose, moved through darkness to the bed, lay down on the far edge, careful not to touch her. She was right, it was practical. It was also terrifying, being this close to another person, feeling her warmth, hearing her breathe. He stared at the ceiling, at shadows cast by moonlight through the window, and wondered when he'd last felt this aware of his own heartbeat. She spoke quietly. "Tell me what you look like. I want to imagine you." He didn't know how to answer. I don't know, Apache, tall, I guess. Long hair, black, brown skin, scars on my chest from a knife fight. Scars on my hands from work. I'm too thin, been hungry too long. There's nothing special about me. That's not what I asked. She turned toward him in the darkness. "I asked what you look like, not what you think of yourself." "Try again." He took a breath. "My hair's past my shoulders, usually tied back but sometimes loose. My eyes are dark brown, almost black. My nose was broken once, healed crooked. I have a scar through my left eyebrow from falling off a horse when I was 10. My hands are rough, calloused. My feet are too big for most boots. I'm 24 but feel older, happy." She smiled. "That's better. Can I touch your face?" "I see better with my hands." He went still. "All right." She reached out, found his shoulder, traced up to his neck, his jaw. Her fingers were gentle, exploratory, reading his features like she'd read the stove, the table, the room. She traced the line of his nose, the scar through his eyebrow, the shape of his cheekbones. His breath caught when her thumb brushed his lower lip. She didn't seem to notice, was focused entirely on building his image in her mind. "You have a strong face," she said. "Hard angles. A mouth that doesn't smile much, I can tell by the muscles. Eyes set deep, I can feel the bones. Hair soft, softer than I expected. You're handsome. I'm not. You are, I can tell. Not by conventional standards, maybe, but by the standards that matter. Strength, character, survival. Those are written in your face." She withdrew her hand, settled back on her side of the bed. "Thank you for letting me see you." He lay there, his face still warm where she touched him. feeling something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Seen, truly seen, not looked at, not judged, but seen. The second week brought rain, sudden and violent. Desert storms that turned the sky black and the earth to mud. The roof leaked in 3 places. They set out pots, pans, anything that could catch water, but still they got soaked. Gabriella laughed, head tilted back, feeling rain on her face. When's the last time you just stood in rain and felt it? Geronimo watched her. This woman who'd been locked away for years, who'd been told she was fragile, standing in a storm with her arms out and her face to the sky. He couldn't remember the last time he'd let himself feel anything without guarding against it. He stepped out beside her, let rain soak through his shirt, his hair, his skin. It was cold and clean and alive. She reached out, found his hand, held it. "We're free," she said. "Not the way we wanted, not the way we'd choose, but we're free from them. From people who wanted us to be small. Out here in the middle of nowhere, we can be as big as we want." He squeezed her hand, said nothing, but felt the truth of her words settle in his bones. That night they lay in bed, both damp, sharing the single blanket Klaus had given him. She was shivering. He moved closer, pulled her against him, shared his warmth. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed, her back to his chest, his arm around her waist. "This okay," she nodded. "This is okay." They fell asleep like that. 2 broken people holding each other against the cold. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, neither of them had nightmares. Morning came with clear skies and new challenges. The rain had flooded the well, turned the water muddy. They'd have to wait for it to settle, ration what they had in the meantime. The garden plot behind the shack, which Geronimo had started to clear, was now a swamp. He'd have to dig drainage, rebuild the furrows, start over. Gabriella inventoried their remaining supplies, counting by touch, organizing by weight and shape. "We have 4 days of food if we're careful," she said. 3 if we're not. After that, we need a miracle or a plan. He chose plan. There was a trading post 15 miles east, run by a man named Chen, who'd come from California during the gold rush, stayed when the gold ran out. Chen dealt with everyone, Apache, Mexican, white settlers, didn't care about politics or prejudice, only commerce. Geronimo had been there once, traded rabbit pelts for coffee. If he could get there, trade something, bring back supplies, they'd survive another week. The problem was, he had nothing to trade, except the $40 Klaus had given him, and he was saving that for true emergency. Gabriella sat at the table, her fingers drumming a rhythm only she could hear. "What about my dress?" "The wedding dress. It's good fabric, old but quality. Someone might want it." He looked at the white dress hanging from a nail, the only nice thing she owned. "You sure?" She nodded. "I don't need it. It represents a life that was never real. Trade it, get what we need. Practical always beats sentimental." He rode out before noon on a horse he'd borrowed by not asking, from the Ortega Ranch's far pasture, a mare past her prime, but steady. He'd return her before anyone noticed. The trading post appeared after 3 hours, a squat building with a porch and a sign in 3 languages. Chen stood outside, smoking a pipe, his face weathered and ageless. He nodded when Geronimo dismounted. "Apache, been wondering when you'd show. Heard about your situation. Whole territory's talking about Don Rodrigo's punishment wedding. How's married life? Wet and hungry?" Geronimo pulled out the dress, handed it over. "What'll you give me for this?" Chen examined it, held it to the light, checked the seams. "Good work. Spanish lace, real cotton. I can sell this to some rancher's daughter, make a good profit." He disappeared inside, came back with a sack. 2 pounds of flour, pound of beans, half pound of coffee, 6 eggs wrapped in cloth, a jar of honey, and a ball of cotton thread. Also this. He handed over a thin book, pages yellowed and worn. Wife who can't see might appreciate stories. "It's got fairy tales, the Brothers Grimm. Read it to her. I can't read well." Chen smiled. "Then learn. Woman like that, smart and trapped, she'll teach you if you ask. That's my final offer." Geronimo took it. It was more than fair. Chen refilled his canteen, sent him off with a wave. "You come back when you need. I don't forget people who survive what they're not supposed to." The ride back was faster, hope making the miles shorter. He arrived at sunset to find Gabriella outside, her hands in the mud, working by touch to clear the drainage ditches he'd started. She was filthy, exhausted, determined. He called out so he wouldn't startle her. "I'm back." She sat up, pushed hair from her face, left a streak of mud across her cheek. "Did you get anything?" He dismounted, pulled out the sack. "Enough for 2 weeks if we're smart. Plus something else." He pressed the book into her hands. Stories. She ran her fingers over the cover, feeling the embossed letters she couldn't read, the texture of old paper, the weight of worlds she'd thought lost forever. Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't bother hiding them. "You traded my dress for food and stories." He knelt beside her in the mud. "Seemed like you needed both." She pulled him close, held him tight, her face pressed against his shoulder. She smelled like rain and earth and something indefinably her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing what I needed, not just what I said." They went inside as darkness fell, cooked eggs and beans, ate until they were full for the first time in a week. After, by firelight, he opened the book, sounded out words slowly, stumbling over fairy and gnome and castle. She corrected him gently, taught him tricks, how to break words into sounds, how to recognize patterns. They read 3 pages, took an hour, but by the end he was better and she was smiling, and something between them had shifted from survival partnership to something neither had a name for yet. That night they lay in bed, close but not touching, the space between them charged with possibility. She spoke first. "I'm glad it was you. Of all the men they could have forced me to marry, I'm glad it was you." He turned his head toward her. "Why?" "Because you see me. Not the blindness, not the burden, not the punishment. You see me, and I think maybe I see you too, even without eyes. Maybe especially without them." He reached across the space, found her hand, held it. "We're going to be okay. I don't know how, but we will." She squeezed back. "We already are. Don't you see? We're alive, we're fed, we're free. That's more than either of us had before." He realized she was right. In losing everything, they'd somehow found enough. Outside, coyotes sang to the rising moon. Inside, 2 people who'd been thrown away as punishment lay side by side, holding hands in the dark, building something new from the wreckage of their separate pasts. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was hope, fragile and fierce, and that was more than enough to carry them through one more night. 3 weeks became a month, and the shack transformed from prison to sanctuary. Geronimo built shelves from scrap wood he'd salvaged from an abandoned homestead 5 miles west, arranged them low enough for Gabriella to reach without asking for help. She organized their supplies with the precision of a general planning a campaign, each item in its designated place, everything memorized down to the inch. The flour lived 3 shelves up, left corner. The coffee, precious and rationed, sat in a tin on the second shelf, right side, next to the honey Chen had traded them. The garden began to produce. Geronimo had planted seeds he'd gathered from wild plants, amaranth and desert marigold, things that thrived in poor soil with little water. Gabriella insisted on helping, her hands in the dirt every morning, feeling for weeds by texture, learning which plants felt like food and which felt like invaders. She worked with a focus that bordered on obsession, and he understood why. The garden was proof she could create, could contribute something beyond survival. It was dignity growing in rows. They fell into rhythms that felt almost domestic. He'd wake before dawn, start the fire, boil coffee. She'd wake to the smell, navigate to the table by memory, sit across from him while they planned the day. Her voice in the morning was rough with sleep, unguarded in a way it never was otherwise. He learned to read her moods by the angle of her head, the set of her shoulders, the way her fingers drummed when she was thinking. She learned his silences, could distinguish between comfortable quiet and the brooding kind, knew when to push and when to let him retreat. One morning she asked about his family. Not the exile, not the shame, but before. What were they like when you were young? He stared into his coffee, seeing faces he'd tried to forget. My mother sang while she worked. Old songs, Apache songs about the land and the sky. She had a voice that made you feel safe, like nothing bad could happen while she was singing. He paused, the memory sharp enough to hurt. My father was hard but fair. Taught me to track, to hunt, to read signs in the earth. He wasn't cruel until I disappointed him. Then he was nothing, just gone, like I'd never existed. And your sister, the one you mentioned, his throat tightened. Her name was Ayana, means eternal blossom. She was 8 when the pneumonia took her. I was 16, thought I knew everything, thought I could save her by wanting it enough. He set down the cup, his hands shaking. I held her for 3 days, while she burned with fever. Sang the songs my mother taught us. Promised her she'd see spring. She died in winter, and I learned that promises are just words we tell ourselves to feel less helpless. Gabriella reached across the table, found his hand, held it. I had a brother who died too, Miguel. He was 5, I was 11. He drowned in the ranch's irrigation ditch while I was supposed to be watching him. I heard him fall in, heard the splash, but I couldn't see where he was. I ran screaming for help, but by the time they found him it was too late. Her voice cracked. My father never forgave me. Said if I'd had my sight I could have saved him. Maybe he was right. He gripped her hand tighter. You were a child. It wasn't your fault. She smiled without humor. And you were 16. Your sister's death wasn't yours to carry either. But we both do, don't we? Carry them, like stones in our pockets that weigh us down, but we can't let go, because then we'd forget them completely. He nodded, then realized she couldn't see it. Yes, that's exactly what it's like. They sat in silence, 2 people bound by loss, by guilt, by the weight of the dead they carried. Outside, quail called to each other, and the sun climbed higher, indifferent to human grief. Finally, Gabriella spoke. Maybe we're not supposed to let go. Maybe we're supposed to let the weight make us stronger. Like how you build muscle by carrying heavy things. Maybe grief is just love with nowhere to go, and carrying it means we're still loving them. He'd never thought of it that way. Had only seen his grief as punishment, as proof of his failure. But maybe she was right. Maybe the weight wasn't meant to crush him, but to remind him he'd loved someone enough to feel their absence. It didn't make it hurt less, but it made it mean something different, made it bearable. The day turned hot, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and turned thoughts sluggish. Geronimo worked on reinforcing the roof, climbing up with boards, scavenged from the same abandoned homestead, hammering them into place. Gabriella sat below in the shade, sewing a shirt for him from cloth she'd unraveled from her petticoat, her needle moving with confidence born from years of navigating the world by touch. They worked in companionable silence, the sound of his hammer punctuating her quiet humming. A rider appeared on the horizon, distant but approaching fast. Geronimo stopped working, shaded his eyes, felt his stomach tighten. Company out here meant trouble. Nobody came this far without reason. The rider resolved into Father Domenico, his black cassock white with dust, his old mare lathered and tired. The priest dismounted heavily, accepted the water Geronimo offered, drank deep before speaking. Don Rodrigo knows you're surviving. The priest's face was grim. He expected you to fail by now, expected to find you dead or gone. The fact that you're still here, still together, it angers him, makes him look foolish. There's talk in town, people saying maybe his daughter didn't need saving, maybe she just needed someone who saw her as human. He doesn't like that narrative. What's he planning? Geronimo helped Gabriella to her feet, kept himself between her and the priest, old instincts rising. Father Domenico glanced at her, then back. He's petitioning the magistrate to annul the marriage, claims you coerced her, that as an Apache, you can't legally marry a Spanish woman without special dispensation. It's nonsense, the marriage is valid, but Thorne owes him money. The magistrate will rule however Don Rodrigo wants. Gabriella stepped forward, her face hard. Let him annul it. I'll refuse to return. I'm of age, I have rights. The priest shook his head sadly. Not as a blind woman. Your father's lawyers will argue you're mentally unfit to make decisions. They'll have you declared incompetent, assign him permanent guardianship. You'll be locked away, maybe in an asylum. I've seen it happen before. The law protects men like your father, not daughters who defy them. Geronimo felt rage rise hot in his chest. So we run, take what we can carry, disappear into Mexico or California. Start over where nobody knows us. Father Domenico looked at him with something like pity. And live as fugitives forever, always looking over your shoulder, always one recognition away from being dragged back. Is that freedom? Is that what you want for her? Then what? Gabriella's voice was steady despite the fear Geronimo could see in the set of her jaw. What do we do? The priest pulled a folded paper from his cassock. There's another way. I've been making inquiries, calling in favors with the territorial governor's office. There's a provision in the law, rarely used, that allows marriages to be validated retroactively if both parties can prove self-sufficiency and mutual consent. You'd need to demonstrate you can support yourselves, that neither of you is dependent on charity or family support. We've been doing that. Geronimo gestured at the shack, the garden, the improvements he'd made. We're surviving on our own. The priest nodded. I know, but you need to prove it officially. The governor's representative is coming to Dos Cruces next month for territorial business. If you can present yourselves, show your garden, your home, testify to your mutual consent and capability, he can validate the marriage permanently. It would supersede any annulment attempt, any competency claim. You'd be legally protected when, what's the catch? Gabriella stepped closer to the priest. There's always a catch. Father Domenico smiled sadly. The catch is, you'll have to come to town, face your father and his vaqueros, stand in front of everyone who's expected you to fail and prove them wrong. The catch is exposure, risk, the chance that Don Rodrigo will try to stop you before you reach the governor's man. The catch is you'll have to be brave in public, not just out here where no one's watching. We'll do it. Gabriella's voice was firm. Tell us when and where. We'll be there. Geronimo looked at her. This woman who'd been locked away for years, who'd been told she was too fragile to exist in the world, now ready to walk into the lion's den. You're sure? She turned her face toward him, her expression fierce. I've spent my whole life hiding, letting other people decide what I could handle, where I could go, who I could be. I'm done hiding. If we're going to build a life, it needs to be ours, not one we're running from. I'm sure the priest gave them the details. 3rd Thursday of the month, noon, at the magistrate's office. Bring proof of self-sufficiency, be prepared to testify, and watch your backs. He mounted his tired mare, looked down at them with something like admiration. You've surprised everyone, you know, including me. I didn't think this would work. I'm glad I was wrong. He rode off, leaving them in a cloud of dust and impending consequence. They spent the evening in tense silence, both processing what lay ahead. Geronimo checked and rechecked his bow, counted arrows, sharpened his knife. Gabriella sat at the table, her fingers moving over the shirt she'd been making for him, stitching with fierce concentration. Finally she spoke. Are you afraid? He stopped sharpening, considered lying, chose truth instead. Yes, of losing you, of them taking you back, of failing again when it matters most. Yes, I'm afraid. Good. Her needle kept moving. I'd worry if you weren't. Fear means you understand the stakes. She tied off a thread, bit it clean. I'm afraid too. Terrified, actually. But I'm also angry, and anger is useful. It's fuel. She set down the shirt, turned her face toward where he sat. My whole life, people have protected me from things they decided I couldn't handle. Made choices for me because they assumed I was incapable. This is the first time someone's asking what I want, letting me choose danger over safety. That's worth fighting for. He moved to sit beside her, close enough to feel her warmth. What do you want? Not what you're supposed to want, not what's practical. What does Gabriela Ortega want if she could have anything? She was quiet for a long moment, her hand finding his, lacing fingers together. I want to be seen, not as the blind daughter or the broken bride or the burden, just as Gabriela. I want to choose my own path even if it's hard. I want to matter to someone, not as obligation but as choice. She turned toward him, her unseeing eyes somehow finding his. And I want you, not because we were forced together, but because given the choice now, I'd choose you every time. His breath caught. He raised her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles, rough and calloused from work. I choose you too. Given everything, everyone, every possibility, I choose this. You, us, here. She leaned in, her free hand finding his face, tracing the lines she'd memorized. Kiss me, not because we're married or because we're supposed to. Because you want to. He'd kissed women before, brief encounters in his youth before the exile, moments of stolen pleasure that meant nothing. This was different. He cupped her face in his hands, leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, and pressed his lips to hers. She tasted like coffee and honey and hope. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, then deeper as she pressed closer, her hands in his hair, his arms around her waist. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads touching. "I love you." The words fell from his mouth before he could stop them. "I didn't mean to, didn't plan it, but I do. I love you." She smiled, radiant and sure. "I know, I've known for weeks. I was just waiting for you to figure it out." She kissed him again, fierce and claiming. "I love you too. Geronimo, the man who was supposed to be my punishment. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." They moved to the bed, lay down together, held each other close. They didn't make love, not yet. That felt like a step requiring more time, more certainty. But they held each other with the desperate intensity of people who'd found something precious and were terrified of losing it. Her head on his chest, his arms around her. They talked through the night, sharing dreams they'd never told anyone. Fears they'd carried alone. Hopes that felt almost too fragile to speak aloud. She wanted to travel someday, to hear the ocean, to feel sand under her feet and smell salt air. He wanted to build her a real house, with glass windows and a wood floor and a garden big enough to feed a family. She wanted children, if they could manage it, wanted to raise them to be brave and kind and unafraid of being different. He wanted to make things with his hands, create beauty instead of just surviving. They wanted ordinary miracles, the kind most people took for granted, and speaking them aloud made them feel possible. Dawn came too fast and too slow. They rose, made coffee, ate the last of the eggs. The day stretched ahead, full of work and preparation. They had 3 weeks to make the shack and garden impressive enough to prove self-sufficiency, to practice their testimony, to prepare for the confrontation that would determine their future. Geronimo looked at Gabriella moving through the space she'd memorized, confident and capable, and felt something settle in his chest. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The work was brutal. Geronimo spent 12-hour days improving everything, building a proper chicken coop for the 3 hens he'd traded for at Chen's post, reinforcing the well, expanding the garden, patching every hole in the roof and walls. Gabriella worked alongside him, hauling water, planting seeds, organizing supplies with military precision. She'd stopped asking for help unless she absolutely needed it, had learned to navigate the property by counting steps, by memorizing landmarks, by trusting her other senses. Evenings they practiced. Geronimo would play Don Rodrigo, demanding to know how a blind woman could possibly maintain a home. Gabriella would answer calmly, listing tasks she performed, demonstrating her organizational system, proving her competence. Then she'd play the skeptical governor's representative, and he'd explain their income, the game he hunted, the goods they traded, the self-sufficient life they'd built. They drilled until the answers were automatic, until they could respond to any challenge without hesitation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. One evening, a week before the hearing, Gabriella sat him down at the table. "There's something I need to tell you, something you should know before we walk into that room." He waited, patient. "When I was 15, after I'd been blind for 2 years, I tried to kill myself. Swallowed laudanum I'd stolen from the medicine cabinet. My mother found me, made me vomit it up, saved my life. But my father never forgave me for it. Said I was weak, ungrateful, that I'd embarrassed the family. He used it as proof I wasn't capable of making my own decisions." Geronimo reached across the table, took her hands. "That was grief, not weakness. You were a child dealing with loss. It doesn't make you incompetent." She shook her head. "I know that now, but he'll use it. He'll bring it up, claim I'm mentally unstable, that I can't be trusted to choose my own path. I wanted you to hear it from me first, so you're not blindsided." He squeezed her hands. "Thank you for telling me. It changes nothing. You survived that darkness, learned to live in it, found light anyway. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever heard." She exhaled, relief evident in the relaxation of her shoulders. "I was afraid you'd see me differently. Impossible. I already know who you are. Someone who fights even when fighting seems hopeless. Someone who chooses life even when it's hard. Someone who sees me when I couldn't see myself." He brought her hands to his lips. "Whatever your father says, whatever anyone says, I know the truth. And so do you. That's all that matters." The night before they were to leave for town, they lay in bed unable to sleep. Gabriella spoke into the darkness. "If this goes wrong, if they take me back, I need you to promise me something. Don't try to rescue me. Don't throw your life away fighting a battle you can't win. Just remember that these weeks with you were the happiest of my life." "That's enough." He pulled her closer, his voice fierce. "It won't come to that. I won't let it. You can't promise that." She touched his face, her fingers gentle. "But you can promise to survive, to live, to find happiness, even if it's not with me. Promise me that." He wanted to argue, to swear he'd burn the world down before he let them take her. But he heard the fear beneath her words, the terror that loving him would get him killed, and he understood that his survival mattered to her as much as hers did to him. "I promise, but it won't come to that. We're going to win." She kissed him, deep and desperate, and for the first time they made love, slow and careful and full of unspoken promises. It was awkward and perfect, two people who'd never been loved properly, learning how to love each other. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his hand in her hair, and neither of them spoke because words felt inadequate for what they'd just shared. Morning came with clear skies and the weight of destiny. They dressed in their best, him in the vest she'd made and the boots from Father Domenico, her in a simple dress she'd sewn from flour sacks, plain but clean. They packed supplies, proof of their garden's yield, letters from Chen testifying to their trading relationship, anything that might help their case. Geronimo saddled the mare, helped Gabriella up, climbed up behind her. She leaned back against him, her body tense but ready. As they rode toward town, toward confrontation and consequence, Geronimo felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. He felt like himself. Not the exile, not the outcast, not the beggar or the savage or any of the names people had called him. Just Geronimo, a man riding toward his future with the woman he loved at his side. Win or lose, live or die, he'd already won the only battle that mattered. He'd found someone worth fighting for, and that made him whole again. The road stretched ahead, dust rising behind them. Dos Cruces waited on the horizon, and with it Judgment Day. Dos Cruces appeared through the heat shimmer like a mirage, adobe buildings bleached white by sun and time. The town was busier than Geronimo remembered. Wagons lined the main road, horses tied to every hitching post, people moving with the purposeful energy of market day. He'd forgotten it was Thursday, the day ranchers came to trade and gossip, when the town swelled to twice its normal size. More witnesses, more eyes to judge them, more ways this could go wrong. Gabriella sat rigid in front of him, her hands gripping the saddle horn until her knuckles went pale. He felt her fear in the tension of her spine, heard it in the shallow rhythm of her breathing. "You are right." His voice was low, meant only for her. She nodded, didn't trust herself to speak. They rode past the cantina, where drunken laughter spilled into the street, past the general store where women in bonnets pointed and whispered, past the church where Father Domenico stood waiting on the steps. The priest raised his hand in greeting, walked out to meet them as Geronimo dismounted and helped Gabriella down. Her legs were unsteady from the ride, from nerves, from the reality of being back in a town that had celebrated her humiliation. Geronimo kept his hand on her elbow, steady and sure. Father Domenico's face was grave. Don Rodrigo arrived an hour ago with 10 vaqueros and 2 lawyers from Santa Fe. He's claiming fraud, coercion, and mental incompetence. The magistrate has already heard his preliminary arguments. This won't be easy. We didn't expect easy. Gabriella lifted her chin, her unseeing eyes fixed on where she sensed the priest's voice coming from. "Where's the governor's representative?" "Inside, waiting. His name is Samuel Thornton, former judge from Texas, good reputation for fairness. He'll hear both sides and make his ruling. The priest hesitated. But understand, he's under pressure. Don Rodrigo has influence, money, connections. Thornton may be fair, but he's also practical. He knows which side of a decision keeps him employed. Then we'd better be convincing. Geronimo scanned the street, noting exits, counting potential threats. The vaqueros were spread out, leaning against buildings, hands near gun belts. Mateo stood directly across from the magistrate's office, his scarred face split by a cruel smile. This was an ambush dressed as a hearing. They'd been fools to think it would be anything else. A crowd had gathered, townspeople drawn by gossip and the promise of spectacle. Geronimo recognized faces from his time at the forge. People who'd ignored him or insulted him, who'd treated him as less than human. Now they watched with hungry eyes, eager to see him brought down, eager to witness the natural order restored. Among them stood a few different faces. Klaus the blacksmith, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Chen from the trading post, his weathered face neutral but his presence itself a statement. Martha Doyle, the widow who ran the boarding house, holding her daughter's hand, her eyes kind. The magistrate's office door opened. Thorne emerged, skeletal and officious, his voice carrying across the street. The territorial hearing regarding the marriage validation of Geronimo, Apache outcast, and Gabriela Ortega will commence immediately. All parties proceed inside. Don Rodrigo exited the cantina, flanked by his sons and the vaqueros. He was a bull of a man, 60 years old but powerful, his face weathered by sun and authority. Silver streaked his black hair. His eyes, when they fell on Gabriela, held no warmth, only cold assessment like she was livestock that had strayed and needed corralling. The office was cramped, stifling hot, barely large enough for the participants. Samuel Thornton sat behind Thorne's desk, a man of 50 with iron-grey hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He wore a simple suit, dusty from travel, and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades weighing truth against lies. The lawyers flanked Don Rodrigo, both in expensive Eastern clothes, both looking at Geronimo like he was something they'd scraped off their boots. Father Domenico stood in the corner, officially present as the priest who'd performed the ceremony, unofficially there as the only friendly face in a hostile room. Thornton spoke without preamble, his voice flat and professional. This hearing will determine whether the marriage between Geronimo and Gabriela Ortega meets territorial standards for validation. I'll hear arguments from both sides, examine evidence, and make a final ruling. That ruling will be binding and immediate. He looked at Don Rodrigo. You petitioned for this hearing. State your case. The rancher stood, his presence dominating the small space. My daughter is blind and has been since childhood. She is incapable of independent living, requires constant supervision, and lacks the mental capacity to make binding legal decisions. This marriage was conducted under duress, without my proper consent as her legal guardian, and should be annulled immediately. Thornton made notes, his face giving nothing away. Evidence. The first lawyer stepped forward, produced documents. Medical records from Dr. Harrison stating that Miss Ortega's blindness renders her dependent on others for basic care. Testimony from household staff attesting to her inability to perform simple tasks without assistance. And this, he held up a paper with official seals. A competency evaluation performed last week by Dr. Morrison of Santa Fe, declaring Gabriela Ortega mentally unfit to make decisions regarding her own welfare. Geronimo felt rage burn through his chest. That's a lie. She's never even met Morrison. Thornton held up a hand. You'll have your turn. He looked at the document, read it carefully, set it aside. What else? The second lawyer spoke. We have testimony that the accused, this Apache, has a history of violence against settlers, that he was exiled from his tribe for crimes of cowardice and betrayal, that he has no means of support and survives through theft and intimidation. He looked at Geronimo with undisguised contempt. This is not a marriage. It's a hostage situation, and we're here to rescue Miss Ortega from her captor. The words hung in the air, poisonous and calculated. Geronimo forced himself to remain still, to not give them the satisfaction of reaction. Gabriella's hand found his, squeezed hard, anchoring him. Thornton finished writing, looked up. "Is that the entirety of your case?" Don Rodrigo nodded. "My daughter belongs home, under proper care, where she can be protected and provided for. This farce has gone on long enough." Thornton turned his sharp eyes to Geronimo and Gabriella. "Your response?" Geronimo stood, helped Gabriella to her feet. She'd insisted on speaking first, had prepared her words with the precision of a general planning an assault. "Mr. Thornton, my name is Gabriella Ortega, and I am not incompetent, coerced, or in need of rescue. I'm a woman who made a choice, the first real choice of my life, and I'm here to defend it." Her voice was steady, clear, loud enough to carry. "I am blind. That is a fact. But blindness is not the same as helplessness, and my father has deliberately conflated the two for his own purposes." Don Rodrigo started to object. Thornton silenced him with a look. "Continue, Mrs. Ortega." She smiled at the title, the first time anyone had called her that with respect. "For 10 years I've been locked away, told I was too fragile to exist in the world, too damaged to contribute, too broken to deserve autonomy. My father kept me hidden because I embarrassed him, because a blind daughter reflected poorly on his legacy. When I refused to marry the merchant he'd chosen, a man who saw me as a means to acquire land, my father punished me by forcing me to marry an Apache outcast. The cruelty was the point. He expected us both to fail, to starve, to disappear. Instead, we survived." She reached into the bag they'd brought, pulled out a ledger, held it up. "This contains 3 months of accounts. Every item we've grown, hunted, or traded. Every transaction with Mr. Chen at the trading post. Every improvement we've made to our property." She set it on the desk. "I maintain these records. I organize our household. I cook, clean, garden, and manage our resources. I do these things not because someone helps me, but because I've learned to do them differently. Blindness requires adaptation, not assistance. There's a difference." Thornton took the ledger, paged through it, his expression shifting from skepticism to something like surprise. "These are remarkably detailed." Gabriella nodded. "I've always had a head for numbers. My father said it was unladylike, forbade me from discussing business. But I listened anyway, learned by eavesdropping on his meetings with ranch managers. I know more about running an operation than any of my brothers. But I was never allowed to prove it because of my blindness." She turned toward where she sensed her father standing. "You didn't lock me away to protect me. You locked me away because I reminded you of failure, of something you couldn't control or fix. I was an inconvenience you wanted to forget." Don Rodrigo's face went purple with rage. "How dare you speak to me this way? I fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head." Gabriella laughed, sharp and bitter. "You did the bare minimum required by law and called it love. You never once asked what I wanted, what I needed, what I dreamed about. You never saw me as a person, only as a problem to be managed. Well, I'm done being managed. I choose Geronimo. I choose our life. And I choose to be seen as human, even if my own father can't manage it." The room went silent. Even the lawyers looked uncomfortable. Don Rodrigo started to speak, stopped, looked to Thornton as if expecting intervention. The territorial representative simply said, "Mr. Geronimo, your turn." Geronimo stood, his prepared speech evaporating in the face of Gabriella's raw honesty. He spoke from instinct instead. "I was cast out from my tribe for refusing to kill innocent people. They called it cowardice. I called it conscience. I've spent 2 years drifting, taking whatever work I could find, being treated like dirt because of what I am. When they forced me to marry Gabriella, I thought it was just another punishment, another way the world was grinding me down." He looked at her, this woman who'd changed everything. "But she didn't treat me like an outcast or a savage or a convenience. She treated me like a man. She saw past what I'd lost to what I still had. Together we built something neither of us could build alone." He pulled out the letters from Chen, handed them to Thornton. "Chen Lao will testify that we trade fairly, that we're reliable and honest. Klaus Bernhardt will testify that I'm a skilled worker who never caused trouble. Father Domenico can attest that our marriage, however it began, has become real. We're not pretending or surviving out of desperation. We're living. We're building a future, and we're asking you to let us keep it. Thornton read the letters, his face thoughtful. He looked at Don Rodrigo. You claim your daughter is mentally incompetent, yet she just delivered a coherent, detailed argument while maintaining complex financial records. He held up the ledger. How do you explain that? The first lawyer jumped in. Her blindness affects her judgment. She's emotionally unstable, has a history of attempting self-harm. She cannot be trusted to make sound decisions. Gabriella's face went white. Geronimo felt her tremble beside him. Thornton's eyes sharpened. Explain! The lawyer produced another document. When Miss Ortega was 15, she attempted suicide by laudanum overdose. This demonstrates a pattern of mental instability that disqualifies her from making binding legal choices. Don Rodrigo nodded. My daughter is fragile, always has been. This marriage is simply another form of self-destruction, and I won't stand by and watch it happen. Thornton looked at Gabriella. Is this true? She took a breath, steadied herself. Yes. When I was 15, 2 years after losing my sight, I tried to kill myself. I was drowning in darkness and grief and saw no way out. My mother saved me, got me help, taught me to want to live again. She paused. That was 8 years ago. Since then I've had hard days, lonely days, days where I wondered if existing was worth the effort. But I never tried again. I chose to live. And choosing Geronimo, choosing our life together, that's me choosing to live fully, not self-destructing. There's a difference between giving up and taking a risk on happiness. Thornton wrote notes, his expression unreadable. He looked at the medical evaluation from Morrison. This doctor claims you're incapable of self-care, yet the evidence suggests otherwise. He held up Chen's letters. These indicate competence, reliability, intelligence. Either Dr. Morrison is lying, or there are two very different Gabriela Ortegas. Which is it? The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Morrison's evaluation was based on medical records and family testimony, so he never actually met her. Thornton's voice was cold. He made a diagnosis without examination, based solely on information provided by people with a vested interest in declaring her incompetent. He set the document aside. This evaluation is worthless. Don Rodrigo stood, his voice rising. You can't dismiss medical evidence because it's inconvenient. My daughter is blind. That makes her vulnerable, incapable of protecting herself. This Apache could be manipulating her, controlling her. We have no way of knowing. Ask her. Geronimo's voice cut through the room. You want to know if I'm controlling her? Ask her directly. Let her speak for herself, instead of having men argue about her like she's not even here. Thornton nodded. Mrs. Ortega, are you being coerced in any way? Are you here against your will? Gabriella turned her face toward the territorial representative, her expression fierce. I am here of my own free will. I am not being coerced, manipulated, or controlled. Geronimo has never forced me to do anything. He's never even raised his voice to me. He treats me with more respect than my own family ever did. If that's control, then I choose to be controlled. But it's not. It's called being treated like an equal. Don Rodrigo slammed his hand on the desk. She doesn't know what she wants. She's confused, emotional, unable to see clearly. The irony was apparently lost on him. Gabriella laughed. I'm blind, Father, not stupid. I know exactly what I want. I want a life where I'm valued for what I can do, not diminished for what I can't. I want a partner who sees me as whole, not broken. I want children someday, and I want to raise them to be kind and brave and unafraid of being different. She stepped toward her father's voice. You never wanted any of that for me. You wanted me hidden, silent, grateful for scraps. Well, I'm done with scraps. I'd rather have dirt with Geronimo than gold in your cage. The silence that followed was profound. Thornton sat back, studied them both, his sharp eyes missing nothing. He looked at Geronimo. You've been quiet about your feelings. Tell me honestly, why did you marry her? Was it truly against your will, or did you see an opportunity? Geronimo met his eyes without flinching. At first, it was survival. I had no choice. She had no choice. We were both being punished by people with power. But somewhere between survival and now, it became something else. He reached for Gabriella's hand, held it. She's the first person in 2 years who's looked at me and seen a man instead of a mistake. She's smart and strong and braver than anyone gives her credit for. I married her because I was forced to. I stay married to her because I want to, because I love her. And if you annul this marriage, you're not saving her. You're condemning us both. Thornton was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled, his expression weighing. Finally he spoke. I've heard enough. He looked at Don Rodrigo. Your daughter is not incompetent. She's articulate, organized, and clearly capable of independent thought and decision-making. The medical evaluation you provided is fraudulent. The competency claims are unsupported, and your concerns about coercion are contradicted by every piece of evidence in this room. He turned to Geronimo and Gabriella. Your marriage meets all territorial requirements for validation. You've demonstrated self-sufficiency, mutual consent, and the ability to maintain a household. Therefore, I rule that your marriage is valid, legal, and binding. Any attempt to annul it is hereby denied. Gabriella's knees buckled. Geronimo caught her, held her up. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. Don Rodrigo stood, his face twisted with rage. This is outrageous. I'll appeal to the territorial governor, to the courts in Santa Fe. Thornton's voice was ice. Appeal all you want. My ruling stands, and I'll be filing a report about Dr. Morrison's fraudulent evaluation. If I were you, I'd focus on explaining that rather than harassing your daughter. He stood, gathered his papers. This hearing is concluded. Geronimo and Gabriela Ortega are legally married. Anyone who interferes with that will answer to territorial law. He walked out, leaving chaos in his wake. Don Rodrigo rounded on his daughter, his hand raised. You ungrateful little. Geronimo moved between them, his hand on his knife. Touch her and it's the last thing you do. The vaqueros started forward. Klaus appeared in the doorway, carrying his largest hammer. Chen materialized beside him, a rifle in his hands. Martha Doyle pushed through, her shotgun leveled. You heard the man, Don Rodrigo. It's over. Go home. Leave them alone. The rancher looked around, saw townspeople gathering outside, saw the balance of power shifting. His lawyers were already retreating, wanting no part of a losing fight. His sons looked uncertain, and his vaqueros weren't paid enough to face down armed shopkeepers over a marriage dispute. Don Rodrigo's face cycled through rage, disbelief, and finally, cold acceptance. You're dead to me, he said to Gabriella. Both of you, you're not my daughter anymore. Gabriella lifted her chin. I never was, not the way you counted. Now I don't have to pretend. He left, his people following, and the office emptied until only Geronimo, Gabriella, Father Domenico, and their unexpected allies remained. Klaus grinned. That was better than a cockfight. Chen nodded. About time someone stood up to that bastard. Martha handed the shotgun to her daughter, embraced Gabriella. You did good, child. Real good. Father Domenico made the sign of the cross. God is merciful. Sometimes he just takes his time showing it. They walked out into sunlight that felt different, cleaner, like a storm had passed. People watched from doorways and windows, some hostile, some curious, some respectful. Geronimo helped Gabriella onto the mare, climbed up behind her. She leaned back against him, exhausted and triumphant. We won. Her voice was small with wonder. We actually won. He wrapped his arms around her, held her close. We did. You were incredible in there." She laughed through tears. I was terrified. "Good." He kissed the top of her head. "Terrified means you understood what we were fighting for." They rode out of Dos Cruces with the sun at their backs and their future secured, heading home to the shack that was more than walls and roof. Heading home to the life they'd built from nothing, heading home to each other. 6 months passed like water finding its level, settling into patterns that felt less like survival and more like living. The shack expanded room by room, Geronimo adding a bedroom, then a proper kitchen, then a covered porch, where they sat evenings watching sunsets she couldn't see but described to him anyway, through the language of temperature and bird calls, and the way wind felt against skin. The garden flourished under their combined attention. Rows of corn and beans and squash, tomatoes climbing stakes, herbs in neat borders that Gabriella tended with the devotion of a sculptor working marble. Word spread through the territory about the hearing, about the blind woman and the Apache outcast who'd stood against Don Rodrigo and won. Some people sneered, called it scandal, predicted disaster. Others saw something different. Possibility, maybe, or hope that the old orders could shift if you pushed hard enough. Families started appearing at their door, people with nowhere else to go, outcasts and misfits, and those the world had decided didn't fit. Geronimo and Gabriella never turned anyone away. There was Maria, a widow with 3 children, whose husband had died in a mine collapse, left with nothing but debt and desperation. She stayed 2 months, worked the garden, learned to cook the way Gabriella taught by touch and patience. When she left, it was with enough supplies to start over in California and the knowledge that kindness still existed. There was Tom, a former soldier who'd lost his leg to gangrene and his mind to what he'd seen in the war, who slept in their barn and woke screaming most nights. Geronimo sat with him through the darkness, didn't try to fix him, just stayed present until the demons retreated. After 3 months, Tom moved on, still broken but carrying himself straighter, like maybe he was worth the space he occupied. There was a Chinese family fleeing persecution in San Francisco, a Mexican boy running from a murder charge that was really self-defense, an Apache girl cast out for loving a white settler's son. They came, they stayed, they left changed or at least steadied. The shack became a way station for the lost, and Geronimo and Gabriella became accidental shepherds of the unwanted. They didn't preach or save, just offered food and shelter and the radical gift of being seen as human. It was exhausting. It was necessary. It was the life they'd chosen. Chen's trading post became their connection to the wider world, a place where Geronimo sold game and vegetables, where Gabriella's carefully organized ledgers helped Chen track inventory and maximize profit. The old trader paid them fairly, spread word that they were reliable, sent customers their way. Money came in, not much but enough. They bought chickens, then a goat for milk, then materials to expand the house further. Klaus came out twice to help with construction, teaching Geronimo joinery and carpentry, refusing payment but accepting meals and the quiet satisfaction of watching something good grow. Father Domenico visited monthly, bringing news and supplies and the particular comfort of someone who'd witnessed their beginning and wanted to see their continuation. He married them again, properly this time, in a ceremony they chose with words they meant. It was spring, wildflowers everywhere, and Gabriella wore a dress she'd sewn herself, blue like the sky she remembered. Klaus stood as witness, Chen brought rice to throw, and Martha Doyle cried like it was her own daughter marrying. After, they had a feast, simple food but abundant, and people came from town, the good ones, the ones who'd learned that different wasn't dangerous. That night, alone in their expanded house with glass windows and a real floor, Geronimo and Gabriella lay in the bed he'd built with his own hands, held each other close, made love with the slow intensity of people who knew how rare and precious this was. Afterward, she traced patterns on his chest, her fingers reading scars like braille, each one a story she'd heard, a piece of history written in skin. "You never talk about going back," she said quietly, "to your people. Do you ever want to?" He was silent, considering. "Sometimes I dream about it. see my mother's face, hear the old songs. But I can't go back to what I was, and they won't accept what I've become." He covered her hand with his. "This is my tribe now. You, this place, the people we help. Maybe tribe isn't about blood or tradition. Maybe it's about choosing who you stand with." She kissed his shoulder. "I choose you. Every day, every moment. I choose you." He pulled her closer, buried his face in her hair, felt the weight of love settle over him like a blanket. It was terrifying and perfect, this vulnerability, this allowing someone to matter so much that losing them would destroy him. But the alternative, the careful distance he'd maintained for 2 years, that wasn't living. That was just breathing, and he was done settling for breathing when he could have this. Summer arrived with brutal heat and news that Don Rodrigo had died. Heart failure, sudden and final, his body found in the ranch house study with papers scattered around him, mid-argument with his accountant about debts and declining profits. Gabriela received the message from one of her brothers, a terse note stating the death and the reading of the will. She was mentioned, left $1, the legal minimum to prevent her from contesting. Her brothers inherited everything, the land, the cattle, the debts, the slowly crumbling empire their father had built through cruelty and pride. She read the note aloud. Geronimo had taught her raised letters, bumps she could feel, a system they'd developed together. When she finished, she folded it carefully, set it aside. "I should feel something. Grief or relief or vindication. But there's just nothing. He was my father, but he stopped being my parent years ago. Is it wrong that I don't mourn him?" Geronimo shook his head. "You can't grieve what you never had. You mourn the father you deserved, not the one you got." She nodded slowly. "Maybe someday I'll be sad for him, for what he could have been if he'd chosen differently. But today I'm just tired of giving him space in my head. They didn't attend the funeral." Gabriela had no desire to stand among people who'd watched her suffering and done nothing, to hear false platitudes about a man who'd treated her like a mistake that needed correcting. Instead, they worked the garden, fed chickens, lived their normal day. It was a choice, deliberate and freeing, to let the past be past without ceremony or closure. Some endings didn't need marking. Some doors you just walked away from without looking back. Fall brought Miguel and Rosa, a young couple barely 20, running from Rosa's father who'd promised her to a man 3 times her age. They arrived at midnight, half-starved and terrified, Rosa visibly pregnant. Gabriela heard them before Geronimo did, woke him with a hand on his chest. Someone's outside, scared. He rose, grabbed his rifle, moved to the door. When he opened it, they nearly collapsed, held upright only by each other. "Please," Miguel gasped. "We heard you help people like us. We have nowhere else." They came inside, were fed, given water, allowed to sleep. In the morning, over coffee and cornbread, the story spilled out. Rosa's father was a magistrate in New Mexico, powerful and brutal, who'd arranged her marriage to a wealthy rancher as payment for gambling debts. Rosa had refused, been locked in a room. Miguel, a stable hand, had loved her since childhood, helped her escape through a window. They'd been running for 2 weeks, staying off roads, hiding in arroyos, terrified of pursuit. Gabriela listened with the intensity she brought to everything, her head tilted, absorbing every word. When they finished, she spoke gently. "You're safe here. Rest, eat, recover your strength. We'll figure out the next steps together." Rosa started crying, overwhelmed by kindness after weeks of fear. Miguel gripped her hand, looked at Geronimo and Gabriela with something like worship. "Why? Why help strangers who might bring you trouble?" Geronimo smiled, tired but genuine. "Because someone helped us when we had nothing. Because that's what you do when you remember what it's like to be desperate." They stayed a month. Miguel proved handy with tools, helped Geronimo build a second chicken coop and repair the well pump. Rosa and Gabriela became fast friends, sitting together in the afternoons. Rosa reading aloud from books, while Gabriela sewed baby clothes, preparing for the child coming in winter. They talked about everything, fears and hopes and the strange journey that had brought them to this place. Rosa confessed she was terrified of childbirth, of being a mother, of failing this tiny person who'd depend on her. Gabriela took her hands. "We're all terrified of the things that matter. Fear means you understand the stakes. But you'll figure it out just like we all do, one day at a time. When Rosa's father's men came looking, they found nothing. Chen had sent word ahead, a warning system he'd established with other traders along the routes. Geronimo and Miguel hid in the hills with the horses, while Gabriela and Rosa stayed visible, 2 women doing laundry. Nothing suspicious. The searchers asked questions, pushed hard, but Gabriela's blindness disarmed them. She played confused and helpless, a performance she'd perfected over years, and they left convinced she couldn't hide anyone even if she wanted to. After they were gone, Miguel emerged, shaking. "How did you stay so calm?" She smiled. "Because I've had practice being underestimated. It's useful when you need it." They left in November, headed for Oregon, where Miguel had cousins who'd help them start over. Rosa hugged Gabriela fiercely, whispered thank you into her hair, promised to name the baby after her if it was a girl. Miguel shook Geronimo's hand, his grip strong, his eyes wet. "You saved us." Geronimo shook his head. "You saved yourselves. You just needed somewhere safe to catch your breath. That's all we provided." But Miguel knew better, and the gratitude in his face said everything words couldn't. Winter came hard that year, snow in late December, temperatures dropping below freezing. The expanded house stayed warm. The stove Geronimo had upgraded burning steady, the walls he'd insulated with mud and straw holding heat. They'd stockpiled food, preserved vegetables, dried meat, stored enough to feed themselves and whatever travelers might appear. On Christmas Eve, Gabriela woke Geronimo before dawn. "I have something for you." "Come outside." He dressed, followed her into the cold pre-dawn darkness. She led him to the barn, where she'd been spending extra time lately, working on something she'd kept secret. Inside, illuminated by a single lantern, stood a wooden table beautifully crafted, smooth as glass, with intricate carvings along the edges. She'd made it herself, working by touch, feeling the grain, shaping the wood through patience and determination. "It took me 3 months," she said, her voice nervous. "I wanted to prove I could create something beautiful, not just functional. For you, for us, for our home." He ran his hands over it, felt the love in every smooth surface, every careful joint. She'd carved their story into the edges, symbols for the shack, the garden, the people they'd helped, a visual narrative of their life. His throat tightened. "It's perfect. You're incredible." She smiled, relieved. "Your turn." He led her back inside to the bedroom, where he'd hidden his gift under the bed. He placed it in her hands, watched her face as she explored it by touch. It was a guitar, simple but well-made, traded from a traveling musician in exchange for a month's worth of meals and shelter. She'd mentioned once, months ago, that she'd played before her father forbade it, that she missed music. He'd remembered, had saved and planned, and finally found this. Her hands trembled as she held it, fingers finding strings, tuning by ear, muscle memory returning. She played a chord, adjusted, played another. Then she began to sing, her voice untrained but pure, a Spanish lullaby her mother had taught her before dying. Geronimo sat beside her, listening to music fill their home, watching her face transformed by joy. This moment, he thought, this is what redemption feels like. Not grand gestures or dramatic salvation, just 2 broken people making each other whole through small acts of love repeated daily until they became a life. She finished the song, set the guitar aside carefully, turned to him. "I want a baby." The words hung between them, huge and terrifying and full of possibility. "I want to build a family with you, to create life instead of just surviving. I want a child who grows up knowing they're loved, who's never told they're less, because they're different. I want that with you." He cupped her face in his hands, kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Then let's make that happen." She laughed, pulled him close, and they made love with new purpose, new hope, planting seeds for a future neither had dared imagine a year ago. Outside, snow fell silent and clean, covering the world in white, erasing old tracks, making everything new. Spring arrived with Gabriela visibly pregnant, her belly swelling with life, her face radiant despite morning sickness and exhaustion. Geronimo hovered constantly, drove her crazy with overprotectiveness, made her laugh with his anxious preparations. He built a cradle from cherry wood, sanded it for hours until no splinter remained, carved protective symbols into the headboard, Apache and Spanish both, covering all spiritual bases. She sewed clothes and blankets, her fingers sure despite her blindness, creating soft things for soft skin. The baby came in late August, a girl born during a thunderstorm, with her mother's dark hair and her father's serious eyes. The birth was hard, 20 hours of labor that terrified Geronimo and exhausted Gabriela, but Martha Doyle was there, experienced and calm, guiding them through. When the baby finally arrived, screaming and perfect, Geronimo held her with shaking hands, this tiny person who was half him and half Gabriela, and entirely her own miracle. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "What should we call her?" Gabriela, exhausted but smiling, reached out. "Let me hold her." He placed the baby in her arms, watched her explore their daughter by touch, fingers tracing the tiny face, counting fingers and toes, learning her child the way she learned everything. "Ayana," Gabriela said, "after your sister." "So she's never forgotten." "And Elena, after my mother." "So she's never forgotten either." "Ayana, Elena." Geronimo's vision blurred with tears. "It's perfect. They're both here with us now." The baby transformed everything. Sleep became rare, peace became impossible. Their carefully ordered life descended into beautiful chaos. Geronimo learned to change diapers and soothe crying and function on 3 hours of sleep. Gabriela nursed their daughter, sang to her in Spanish and English, told her stories about brave girls and clever women, and a world where being different was gift, not curse. They took turns walking her at night, pacing the room while Ayana fussed, whispering promises about the life they'd give her. People came to see the baby, bringing gifts and congratulations. Klaus carved wooden toys. Jen brought silk cloth from San Francisco. Father Domenico baptized her in their home, holy water blessed with prayers in 3 languages. Even some townspeople who'd been hostile softened because babies had a way of making people remember their common humanity. "Look at that," Martha said, holding Ayana while Gabriela rested. "An Apache and a blind Spanish girl made this perfect creature. Maybe that's God's way of telling us our divisions are stupid." Geronimo stood on the porch one evening, Ayana asleep against his chest, watching the sun paint the desert gold and red. Gabriela joined him, her hand finding his waist, her head resting on his shoulder. "Are you happy?" He thought about the question, about everything they'd survived to reach this moment. 2 years ago I was nothing, had nothing. Wanted nothing because wanting hurt too much. Now I have everything. You, our daughter, this home, a purpose." He kissed the top of Gabriela's head. "I'm more than happy. I'm whole. For the first time in my life, I'm whole." She squeezed him tighter. "We did it. They tried to break us, and we built something beautiful instead." He nodded. "The best revenge is living well." She laughed softly. "That's not revenge. That's just life. Good, honest, hard-earned life. And it's ours. Nobody can take it away." Years would pass. Ayana would grow strong and curious, would learn to navigate a world that didn't always understand her family, but couldn't deny their love. More children would come. 2 boys who'd learn carpentry from their father and music from their mother, who'd grow up thinking difference was normal and kindness was mandatory. The house would expand again and again, rooms added as needed, becoming a sprawling testament to unconventional family. Don Rodrigo's ranch would fail, sold for debts, divided among strangers, the empire built on cruelty dissolving like it had never existed. But that was future, and this was now. This was Geronimo holding his daughter while his wife held him, standing in the doorway of a home they'd built from nothing, watching the sun set on a day that had started with them broken and ended with them whole. This was the moment when punishment transformed into gift, when 2 people the world had thrown away became the foundation of something beautiful and lasting and true. Gabriela spoke quietly. "Tell me what you see." He described the sunset in detail, the colors and shadows, the way light touched everything before departing. She listened, building the image in her mind, seeing through his eyes the world she'd lost, but never stopped imagining. When he finished, she said, "It sounds beautiful." He pulled her closer, his family complete and perfect in his arms. It is. But not as beautiful as this. The stars emerged one by one, ancient and patient. Inside, the fire crackled, the cradle rocked gently, the guitar leaned against the wall, waiting for morning songs. Outside, the desert stretched endless, harsh and unforgiving to those who didn't understand it, but home to those who did. Geronimo and Gabriela stood together in their doorway, neither belonging to the world that made them, but both belonging to each other. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that ever happened. Not because the pain wasn't real or the injustice wasn't wrong, but because you chose to build something better from the wreckage. Love isn't about perfect circumstances or easy paths. It's about finding someone who sees you in the dark and stays anyway, who holds your hand through the storm and helps you build shelter on the other side. Geronimo and Gabriela learned that together, taught it to their children, proved it to a world that didn't think people like them deserved happiness. They were wrong. Everyone deserves happiness. Some people just have to fight harder to claim it. The desert wind blew gentle, carrying the scent of sage and promise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people needing help, new obstacles to overcome. But tonight was for rest, for gratitude, for holding close the people who made life worth the struggle. Geronimo closed the door, carried his sleeping daughter to her cradle, joined his wife in bed. They held each other in the darkness, listening to their child breathe. And somewhere in that simple moment found everything they'd been searching for since before they knew each other's names. Peace, purpose, home. 2 years had passed since that August thunderstorm brought Ayana into the world. 2 years that felt both impossibly long and startlingly brief. The compound had grown, not sprawling yet, but purposeful. A second building added for travelers who stayed longer. A proper barn with stalls for the 3 horses they now owned. A smokehouse for preserving meat through winter. The garden stretched wider each season. Gabriela's organizational system expanded to accommodate the abundance. Rows marked with stones she could identify by touch, each plant catalogued in her meticulous memory. Ayana toddled through the main room, her small hands grabbing everything within reach, her curiosity boundless and exhausting. She had Geronimo's dark eyes and serious expression, Gabriela's determined chin and fearless disposition. She spoke in fragments, mixing Apache words Geronimo taught her with Spanish from Gabriela and English from the travelers who passed through. She was growing up trilingual, without realizing languages were supposed to be separate. The world to her was just sounds that meant things, and she collected them all with equal enthusiasm. Gabriela sat at the table, teaching a young Apache woman named Nasha how to organize supplies by weight and texture. Nasha had arrived 3 months ago, cast out from her tribe for refusing an arranged marriage, her story an echo of so many others who'd found sanctuary here. "You're ready," Gabriela said, approval clear in her tone. "When you leave next week, you'll be able to manage accounts for any trading post or ranch that's smart enough to hire you." Nasha's voice was soft with gratitude. "I never thought being cast out would lead to learning, to having skills people value." Gabriela smiled. "Being cast out isn't the end. Sometimes it's the beginning, if you're brave enough to see it that way." Outside, Geronimo worked with Miguel, who'd returned for a visit with Rosa and their daughter Carmen. Miguel had done well in Oregon, found work as a carpenter, saved enough to buy land. They'd come back to show what their help had made possible, to say thank you in person because letters couldn't carry the weight of gratitude. The 2 men repaired fence posts, working in comfortable silence. Miguel spoke quietly. "Rosa wants another baby. I'm terrified. What if I fail them?" Geronimo's voice was measured. "You'll be terrified every day for the rest of your life. That's fatherhood. But you'll figure it out because you have to, because love makes you capable of things you never thought possible." Evening came with desert softness, air cooling, light golden and forgiving. They gathered for dinner around the table Gabriela had made, the one with their story carved into the edges. Ayana sat in Geronimo's lap, stealing food from his plate. Father Domenico arrived bringing news from town. Don Rodrigo's sons lost the ranch, he said. Sold at auction last week to cover debts. Some in town say it's justice. Others say cruelty doesn't build anything lasting. Gabriella was quiet, processing. Do I feel satisfaction? I thought I might, but there's just emptiness where anger used to be. They destroyed themselves. The priest nodded. That's wisdom. You chose to build something better instead. Later, after Ayana surrendered to sleep, after the house settled into night's particular quiet, Geronimo and Gabriella sat on the porch together. She leaned against him, his arm around her shoulders, her hand resting on her stomach where new life was just beginning to grow. Our second child, she said quietly. I'm terrified and thrilled in equal measure. He kissed her temple. We'll figure it out like we figured out everything else. She laughed. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd refused? If we'd run instead of going through with the wedding? He considered it. We might have survived separately, found different lives, been fine. But we wouldn't have had this. Each other, Ayana, this place, this purpose. The punishment they meant to destroy us became the thing that saved us. I don't believe in fate, Gabriella said slowly, but I believe in choice. They tried to take ours away, but we claimed it back. Every day we chose each other, chose to build instead of surrender. That's not destiny. That's just stubbornness and love mixed together. He tightened his arm around her. That's the best definition of marriage I've ever heard. A coyote called from the hills, another answered. Inside, Ayana stirred, mumbled something in her sleep, settled again. Tomorrow, Miguel and Rosa would leave, heading back to Oregon with promises to visit next year. Nasha would continue her training, would leave the following week with skills and confidence to start over. More travelers would come, more broken people seeking shelter, more lives intersecting briefly with theirs before moving on changed. The pattern would repeat because that's what they'd built. A place where transformation was possible, where being cast out could become coming home. Are you happy? Gabriella asked the question she'd asked before, would ask again. He thought about happiness, how he'd once believed it was for other people born into better circumstances. He'd learned that happiness wasn't something you were given. It was something you built, board by board, choice by choice, day by day, until you looked around and realized you'd constructed something worth protecting. Yes, he said simply. Every day in ways that surprised me, yes. She smiled. Good, because I am too, and I'd hate to be happy alone. They sat watching the night, listening to the desert breathe, holding the peace they'd fought for with everything they had. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight was for rest, for gratitude, for remembering that they'd survived what was meant to break them and emerged stronger. Inside, their daughter slept safely. Around them, their land stretched fertile. Above them, stars marked infinity, and between them, love burned steady and sure. The kind that survived being forced, that grew in spite of intention, that transformed punishment into the greatest gift either had ever received. Geronimo stood, offered Gabriella his hand, helped her to her feet. Time for bed. Tomorrow starts early. She took his hand, let him guide her inside. They checked on Ayana one last time, watched her chest rise and fall with the uncomplicated breathing of innocence, then went to their own bed. They held each other in the darkness, two people who'd learned that sometimes the worst punishment becomes the best blessing, that love can grow in the harshest soil, that being whole doesn't mean being unbroken. It just means being brave enough to let someone see your cracks and love you anyway. The wind whispered through the eaves. The house settled into sleep, and in the quiet darkness of the Arizona territory, two hearts beat in rhythm. Proof that sometimes, against all odds and expectations, love wins. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.